transition context. Over to you. And we are live streaming now, aren't we? Absolutely. Welcome to the people who are online.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this briefing is sort of a refresher and an update to help inform some of the long-term plan conversations you'll be having this afternoon and early tomorrow morning, or tomorrow morning, not early tomorrow morning, normal time tomorrow morning. So we're trying to refresh your minds to some of the complex transition context that you're creating this long-term plan within. This is a really high-level opening briefing. There's of each of the transition drivers that we're talking about here, there's more in-depth briefings that are coming to you either tomorrow or in the coming weeks. So this is sort of the setting the doormat for the briefings this afternoon and tomorrow. So we've spoken before, you've spoken before about the external change that's affecting regional government's function, form, funding, and how our partnership is expressed, and the number of different changes coming from central government that affect those. You considered all of this as part of your strategic direction work, which you endorsed this morning. And you've also considered it as part of legislation that's coming through the central government update that you discussed in strategy and policy this morning as part of conversations at Turopatuia, at council, and various other places. There should be nothing here that surprises you. I'm just reminding you of some of the framing that you've already been working within. But together, as you're well aware, all of those pressures on funding, function, form, and partnership are driving quite a bit of uncertainty. It's quite hard, as you'll be aware, to set a 10-year direction when the next 10 days are pretty unclear. There's uncertainties from all of those pressures around the institutional form of regional councils, uncertainties around the timing and sequencing of all of those government changes that are happening, when they're happening, and how connected they are to each other. There's uncertainties across that 10-year period of the functions that will be delivered through that long-term plan, and uncertainties about the size and scope of work that you'll be required to deliver around the long-term plan. None of these are things that are new to you. You're well aware of all of these things. Just bring them to the top of your mind. And that's to let alone the impacts of decisions that might be made by future governments within that 10-year period, decisions that might need to be made in the face of climate change or extreme weather events that happen across that 10-year period, all of those things. Fortunately, you as councillor have already made a number of decisions to help you grapple with that uncertainty within this transition context. You've made some decisions around the annual plan for this year. We looked very strongly at the potential rate rise within that annual plan. You've endorsed a transition-ready strategic direction just this morning for the long-term plan that sets you up for transition, and you've had a number of conversations around taking a more flexible transition-focused approach to long-term planning. So you're already grappling with all of this transition here. You're also working, and those are the things that are within your control around how you do your annual plan and your strategic direction. You're also influencing the things that aren't directly within your control and are subject to all of those drivers. So, for instance, you hosted the Canterbury Simplifying Local Government Summit a few weeks ago. That's to influence and provide the information to the decision makers in that process, both central government and territorial authorities, in order to get outcomes for you that help you make decisions across the next 10 years. You're also doing work through the regional sector, Chair Swiggs, and you're also doing work through submissions in various other places. So you're seeking to do what you can to influence all of those pressures that are outside of your control, as well as making decisions to be transition ready on the things that are within your control.
Just the other thing that is really important and shouldn't be understated, and isn't there, and I saw this last night, but I didn't think about it, is the influence that each individual council or local councillor in their elected area has with their councillor counterparts. And I think that is really important, and that's a huge influencing factor that we shouldn't underestimate.
So
looking at you.
So within that complex context that you've been grappling with, And as you step into the next stage of LTP development with the workshops across the coming hours, staff wanted to give you a rapid what we're calling a rapid status update on 3 of the key drivers of uncertainty in this context. So this isn't an exhaustive list of everything, but we've sort of cherry-picked the things that have moved since your last long-term plan update, given you've been on constituency week and recess week for the last 2 weeks. So they've moved a wee bit since your last conversations around the long-term plan. They significantly affect your long-term plan decision-making, and they're subject to central government decision-making that is shifting and moving. So consider this a sort of a curated meal of transition drivers as opposed to the full smorgasbord that we would normally speak to you about.
This is the gift that keeps giving, that one, isn't it?
And in that spirit, what we've done here is, so we've shown you before a timeline of a large number of legislative changes that are coming at you and how those play out across the coming years. What this timeline does, and I will note, it is intentionally complex. So if it looks complex, that is not our design, but it's because of the number of things going on. What this does is take those 3 key transition drivers that we noted on the last slide: simplifying local government, resource management reform, and the local government system improvements and rates capping, and illustrates some of the components that are happening in those spaces in the lead up to the long-term plan and following the long-term plan. That just shows that you're creating this long-term plan and doing it right in the middle of some incredibly complex things, some of which are within your control, many of which are outside of your control. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Olivia to give you an update on the resource management reform and where that's at, noting that the Select Committee report back will be happening on the 20th? I couldn't remember if it was the 20th or 30th. On the 20th, and you will be briefed on that on the 30th. That was what was in my head. I'll provide a quick update on simplifying local government and where that's at, noting that we have a briefing on that tomorrow in more detail, so it'll be very high level conversation today. And then I'll hand over to Cecilia to talk through the rates capping and simplifying local government content, all to bring this to the front of your mind to inform the long-term plan conversations you'll be having. Olivia, over to you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. So, as Patrick mentioned, so you've got your briefing on the 20th of July, which means we're ready and waiting in anticipation, and staff will be providing you with some analysis following that release of that report, followed by a more fuller briefing on the 30th. I do want to indicate to you, though, that the indications are there will be significant changes in those bills. Minister Bishop has sort of fronted that in the media to say change is coming. We also know the fact that they've taken an extra month to prepare the Select Committee report suggests that there's some coalition negotiations going on at the moment around that, and all of that is signalling impending change. And if we look ahead, they've got 15 sitting days between when the Select Committee report comes out and between when Parliament rises to get the legislation passed. And there's still indications that they are looking to meet that timeline as we currently understand it. Since we've last talked to you, we now know that the government is also working on its parallel program of developing its secondary legislation. And some of the new information in that space include that we'll have an illustrative draft of the national policy direction in August. So that is the layer of policy that sets out the outcomes to be delivered under this new system. We're also expecting some transitional national rules. Now, those are rules that will apply to activities. And on the slide it says coming into force later this year, but we actually at the moment understand that they'll probably consult later this year and coming into force possibly early next year. And the indications are that those rules will look to standardise things more, and so the scope of your decision making will be probably, as expected, quite constrained in the new system, and that's been signalled by government. Freshwater Farm Plan regulations, those are expected also to land in the next few months based on what we're hearing currently. And also the government is continuing work on its national standards under the new system. What I'm setting out here is that we're in for quite a journey over the next few months in terms of the functional and funding implications of the resource management reform program. And as you take this into your long-term plan decisions, note that this is an area which will continue to evolve and we'll have to keep regularly updating you. This is the timeline. You can see we're right before the Select Committee report. I do just want to highlight to you, though, that the Select Committee report isn't the end of changes. We typically see further changes tabled at the Committee of the Whole House stage. So we will be looking out for those as they land, and we'll provide you information as to what the government is looking to position post-Select Committee report. Now, alongside actually delivering the legislation, the government's committed $61 million to its digital transformation program. That's over the next 4 years. But there are considerable uncertainties around the what is to be delivered through that system at the moment, as the government is still forming that up. So the decisions to be taken still cover things like what type of e-plan system will be delivered, how will that integrate with our council systems? What are the data standards? And there's a dependency here, if you're thinking about LTP, in terms of delivering the spatial plan. So we're hoping in the next few months we'll get more information about this, including the timing of those deliverables. You will have seen this slide many times before, and I'm not going to talk to the content on it, but I do want to make a couple of points about it. This is setting out government's intent for the new system, but translating intent into implementation, is a tricky thing to do. What we're seeing at the moment is that while the government is looking to move swiftly on the implementation of the system, it's happening at the same time as we're undergoing all the other reform programs. And as the system becomes more complex and there's more organisational change, thinking about that at both a local and a central level, that does start to increase the risk for delivery. And we're starting to see that emerge in some of the Treasury reports. So the latest Treasury report that came out has indicated that across government agencies, and this isn't just specific to resource management reform, but that the capacity to deliver for government is not necessarily matching what the ability is to. So things have been funded, but the capacity isn't necessarily matching. And that the forecasting estimates are generally optimistic. If we look down to the resource management system, Treasury is indicating that the ability to deliver on the organisational change program, particularly through MCERT, is currently rated amber. So amber means there are risks for delivery of that program. The reason I am highlighting this to you is to give you that context of what's being promised through the system, but to be live to the fact that there are uncertainties around delivery, and that's something you will have to grapple with as you make decisions going forward. There's 2 more slides in this rapid update, and the first one here, I just want to highlight again some of the critical shifts that we are seeing through the design of the resource management system and the implications. Each of the points on that slide has an implication for funding decisions. It's government's intent to deliver a cheaper, faster and more efficient system over the long term. What I would say is that transition period is an area where there are risks for increased cost. As you get into a system that's more complex and more uncertain, the cost of transitioning can sometimes increase as a result of dealing with multiple systems. There are also implications for workforce planning and transition planning generally, and I just want you to be live to the fact that while there are signals around reducing cost over the long term, this transition period will be a more challenging position to navigate in terms of the funding decision. And lastly, just to finish on the slide, this slide here sets out what we anticipate to be the shift from our current state under the Resource Management Act to the future system. And there are a couple of points I want to make about this slide. The first is, these are the shifts as we understand them today based on the information we have. We know that in terms of the work that the council will need to deliver, That's dependent on what's set in the secondary legislation, so that's a significant uncertainty, and we'll get more information as we start to see consultation on that. But thirdly, I want to emphasise the fact that when we're talking about the work to be delivered, and whether it's a contraction or an expansion, what I'm signalling here is the work to be delivered by the council. So to put that into context, if we think about compliance, monitoring and enforcement, across the system, government has indicated that that will be strengthened and that we are likely to see CME playing a stronger role in the system. The impact for the council's work is uncertain because we don't have decisions on things like whether the national regulator will be stood up, whether regional hubs will be implemented, or whether it will all be done centrally. Same for science and data. We expect science and data to play a stronger role in the system, but the extent to which that impacts on our work will depend on how much science and data is front-loaded into the system and which functions we retain. So this is just to give you an indication. And I think that concludes my very rapid update. We will be coming back to you through the later briefings on this.
Any questions of what's been put out there so far? Claire, Peter, John?
Just with regarding to those two last slides, and we're talking about consents contraction due to more permitted activities, but at the previous slide we talk about a more complex regulatory environment during transition and the dual system potentially operating, or you suggest operating here. Do we actually have a sense at this stage, will both sets of rules, like our current rules under the RMA, under our planning, apply as well as the new rules?
So indications are we will definitely be operating two systems, so the Resource Management Act and the new system. The government is still taking decisions on the transitional national rules that are intended to come in, and they are considering at the moment whether or not those rules prevail over planning rules or whether they stand alongside. That is something they're still taking advice on. In terms of the switchover timeframes, when we go from the current RMA to fully switched over, that will depend on those sequencing timeframes that come out through the Select Committee report. Yeah.
Peter.
Thank you, Olivia, as always, for your knowledge and your work that you're doing in this area. The comment that you made about the Treasury advice was that it's... Can you just go back and say what you said, because that's what keyed this question to me.
So the latest Treasury report, so that's the report back in March, indicated that the ability of government, the capacity of government to deliver what has been funded, there's a mismatch there currently, and there are some risks emerging around the delivery of specific programs.
So it's a bit of a leading question for you on this. Is that based around structural reform or legislative reform that's going to make that more difficult?
I think it's the combination of everything. So in terms of the resource management space specifically, it was the organisational change component as we're shifting from MFE to MCERT. But in terms of the program entirely, I think it's the layering up of all the different reforms and organisational changes.
Well, so it seems, and we've got a bit of angst around the fact the time we've got from the Select Committee to the second reading and those sorts of things, and the changes that have been mooted that are going to happen. Do you think they're a reflection of what Treasury said? Do you think that could be some simplification of the process?
I have no idea, but and it was. Look, I think it's been publicly shown that or indicated that there are things that need to be simplified in the legislation and some greater certainty. So we can assume the Select Committee is taking that on board, and government will be looking at its priorities, etc. Yeah.
So can I just ask? Can I just say this, because I think that, to me, in my mind, that's something that we're still tossing up and down. In terms of Patrick's timeline, I mean, that your timeline could be 5 years in terms of before this gets settled, because I don't think you're going to settle it in 2028. I mean, I don't think it's going to be done by then. And my personal opinion on this is that this whole thing could go on for a while.
John Faulkner.
Thank you, Olivia. I was looking at page 12 and page 14, and there's two comments in regards to treaty obligations, and that took me to mana whakahono Aroi and the excitement that's out in the public domain at the moment over those relationship forming. And you look at on page 12, clearer consultation requirements on who needs to be consulted and iwi, and then on page 14 a narrowed focus, and there's a contraction. So in your view, your assessment, is the concern around the power of a mana whakahono Aroi being overblown because the RMA process and narrowing of focus will constrain the ability of those relationships to be stronger than what the concerns are in the public domain?
This might sound like a sidestep, but it's not. I am aware that you have a briefing tomorrow on this, and it's more detailed around the mana whakahono Arohi. What I would say is that the system as we're seeing it is narrowing the extent to which te tiriti and the rights and interests of Māori are recognised in that system. Mana whakahono Arohi are an attempt to provide an avenue for that to be addressed, or at least reflected. But I probably would reserve from commenting further because I'm not up to speed with the latest sort of discussions around that, and I think you've got staff coming tomorrow who'll be better briefed on where those discussions are at.
You park that one for tomorrow as well. Genevieve.
Thank you guys for discussing it. It's a very difficult subject, and you do it with grace. That's what I want to say. I actually sitting here feeling quite ill reading this, to be honest. I'm not going to lie. I think on the page 12 it says it all. I mean, the government's intent for the resource management system is a contradiction in itself, not by what you've said, but by the intentions. And so from a streamlined system to stronger environmental limits, I mean, they actually contradict each other almost. So my question is, I guess, the government's intent for stronger environmental limits is one thing, but in your view, have you seen evidence of that so far?
The environmental limits at the moment are still being developed by the government. I don't have any visibility of where they are looking to set those limits. I think there are tensions between what the planning bill is trying to achieve and some of the outcomes and goals to be achieved through the Natural Environment Bill. And the government has indicated that the national policy direction is the space where they will try to resolve those conflicts. It will be a challenge, being honest.
Well, just as, from where I sit and looking at, the contradictions and uncertainties, it feels like a mirror image of what's happening in the US and Australia at the moment. And I'm not liking what I'm seeing. And I'm going to be vocal about it because I think there's something fundamentally flawed about this. And we can do as much feedback as we want, but ultimately the end game is centralisation of everything, every thought process, from the health system to government. And I just think, thank you for bringing this to us, though, and always been the consistent voice. So, it feels like we've been given everything, but, the government's holding back at this stage. And so, thank you.
Was there any other slides that you had?
This was unfortunately just one slice of the picture that we were showing to you. We were also going to briefly speak to simplifying local government and rates capping, both of which are key things for you to be considering in long-term plan.
Were you going to do that now, or
sorry?
Do you want to try and rush through that? If we can come back at the end. We'll get those questions here. So we'll rush through.
We'll rattle through very quickly.
Yeah.
Simplifying local government, you have a briefing tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into this in much detail at all. What I will reflect is that, as you're well aware, conversations are happening across the region, and this table is already disastrously out of date from when we sent it to you on Friday with these briefings. Decisions are happening this week and across the coming weeks, and we'll speak through that in much more detail tomorrow. But what we did want to reflect is that where other councils land with simplifying local government proposals through the Head Start process, and where the region and those territorial authorities and future unitary authorities may land with the form of delivering services we currently provide, will take effect during that long-term plan 10-year process, and so that transition will also be something we'll need to consider through those 10 years. And Cecilia, I'll hand over to you to speak to this component.
Thanks, Patrick. So this wasn't to go through all the local government system improvements, bill and rates capping changes, because, the local government system improvements bill has just had its second reading, and we're awaiting the Committee of the Whole House stage, where we're expecting further amendments from both the Select Committee report, but also that have been signalled by government that will be tabled. So I just wanted to focus on the refocusing of the purpose of local government to what it was 2019, when the four aspects of wellbeing came back in, and the reinstatement of a list of core services. Given this, context has changed a lot since 2019, when the purpose and core services were those, particularly to note through this bill, the new measuring and reporting requirements around council performance to meet government's initiative to benchmark all of council's performance. And also, of course, the rates capping. So government want a more consistent reporting framework across councils to support this rates capping system, but it'll also support Officer of the Auditor General's function, contribute to MCERT's local governance stewardship function, and also assist infrastructure conversations. And don't have any significant updates on the rates capping, where that's at since your submission earlier this year, aside from a recent letter from the local government minister around civil defence, where it just confirmed that there'll be very limited circumstances where councils will be able to operate outside the rates capping model, but that there was some consideration by officials being given in the design of the system around the concerns from council about the significant costs from new statutory obligations. Do you want me to get through?
Wait till the end, John. We'll go through this first.
Yeah, I've just got the slide in the next. This just again, just the uncertainty that we're working within, and one of the snapshots of the timeline. As I mentioned, we're waiting for the Committee of the Whole House stage for the framework around the reporting requirements, purpose and core services, with the intent that the government wants to pass the legislation before the House rises. And government have also indicated that they want to introduce the rates capping legislation, but given the complexity of that legislation, not quite sure how and when that might play out. And finally, this slide just summarises the sort of high-level shifts in consideration. As Patrick mentioned at the beginning, the strategic direction endorsed earlier this morning in the core services frameworks sets up a good position to respond to these changes through the local government systems improvements bill, and it could provide some opportunity through supporting council's priorities around transition and focus on core function, but of course, the limited ability to fund and more scrutiny and justification of funding.
Is that it?
And we were just going to reflect next steps for each of the, when you'll next hear back about each of the things we've discussed today. So long-term plan development immediately following this conversation. Resource management reform, you'll hear back next on the 30th of July, following the release of the Select Committee report. Simplifying local government, tomorrow we have a session on that. And the local government system improvements bill and rates capping, that's currently waiting the committee of the whole house stage, and you'll be briefed on that bill and any amendments to that bill through the committee of the whole house stage as we become aware of them. But in terms of dates and timeframes, all we have reflected is government's intention to pass those before the end of this term.
Urgency, urgency, urgency. We won't really know what's going to happen. Okay, oh, yeah. Thanks, Claire. I've got Sarah Gerard and then John Faulkner.
A question back to the resource management. When we've got environmental limits, how do you feel that will work with cumulative effects? So, yeah, the management of cumulative effects.
It will depend a lot on what the final legislation says, to the extent to which cumulative effects can be taken into account, and then it will depend on what the secondary legislation says in terms of any constraints or parameters that councils will need to operate within when they set limits. So it's a bit of a, we need to see what the two pieces say. Regional councils at the moment still retain that function for setting environmental limits, and the typical process would be that you would consider cumulative effects when setting them, as we understand it currently.
John?
Yeah, on the rates capping policy, can you clarify what only water related actually the definition is? Like, water for me is quite broad. Is that just drinking water?
Yes, I understand that's around the new water service entities and, yeah, the drinking water, yeah, asset infrastructure, yeah.
Pipes and infrastructure for water service delivery. Nick Moody and then Andrea Davis, and then we're going to have to close off.
Thanks, team. Just wanted to feedback that I found this really easy to read, this briefing. I really love this sort of nice timeline here with little pins. You know, it's a thing of beauty compared to trying to get my head around these sort of overwhelming, you know, big boxes. And
we need to teach you how to use Gantt charts.
Yeah, I could have used one a couple of months ago. Also, maybe some of the other stuff too is really good, like that spreadsheet that shows where the different councils are at and the boxes and ticks and stuff. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it's a nice change from the usual hugely wordy briefing paper. So thank you.
And last but not least, Andrea.
Question for Olivia. So when they do these setting the environmental limits, will they look at any case law from all these years of case law from the RMA? What do they do with all of that information?
It depends on the extent to which it's relevant in the context of a new system. So in terms of the environmental limits, as they currently stand, they have to be developed to support the life supporting capacity of water. I think there has been some case law around that in the past, so that could potentially be relevant for informing that decision, but it depends on the specific wordings and how relevant it is in the context of the new system. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, team, for bringing this to us. Again, a good presentation, lots of fast-moving pieces here, and looking forward to keeping the conversation alive for what we need to be thinking about in the next steps. Appreciate that. The next presentation is long-term plan. Amy and LTP team. Well, this is a 2-hour presentation, so if people wanted to grab a quick drink, who's going to chair this? Is this a Megan and Nettles chair, or am I going to be doing it? Megan, you chair it because it is your committee looking after LCP, so you can do that.
welcome everybody to the next session, the long-term plan 2027 to 37. Thank you. Staff to the table, led by Amy, and I'll hand it over. Thanks very much.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Chair and councillors. So, that's not the slide that I'm reading from. I hope that's, there we go. So I just wanted to briefly introduce the next, I guess, couple of days or sessions around the long-term plan, and before I hand over to Carmen, just some assurances, which I think is useful, not just for those in the chamber, but also those who aren't. So there's a clear expectation of direction, and that we're meeting that. So you all agreed, or you gave us direction around how we wanted to tackle the long-term plan, and it wasn't the way that we'd done things before. We're not going to grind through the process, that we're going to be very mindful of the changing context, the legislative change, central government direction, but also that in the next 2 years, dollars to donuts, that we will be transitioning, and that actually let's be mindful of that now as we proceed, but also ensure that the process includes those discussions, because some of those transitionary activities will need funding. So we have promised you that. For some of you that if this is your first time round, you're going, this just sounds like normal. So good process should feel like normal, but the process and the approach that we're using means that the information that we are gleaning or direction that we are receiving from you, we are using that in a different way, and we are also using that for the long-term plan, what we need to deliver for statutory purposes, but also that is informing every day how we're thinking about the organisation going forward. And thank you, Councillor Robinson, for the previous session around always putting in front of us the importance of these changes and our performance, and connecting us back to our accountability. These are all related. So, and we are mindful of that, but I was grateful to actually get, my inner geek was happy because I get more airtime to remind people. Yeah, heads up, it's a positive thing I've just said to you. Thank you. So that was all I really wanted to say. We've got 2 days worth. We've got the session ahead of us around some financial context, the transport and the 30-year infrastructure. And tomorrow we've got a full session with our remaining core services. So over the next 2 days, we will cover off the core services. And we will again, we'll be doing a couple things. We will be confirming some of the things that you told us in Wānanga, which wasn't in the public domain. And also we will be testing some more assumptions with you. And I think it's, while it feels like, we've been using a lot of food analogies, so while it feels like a lot of flour and water and effort and mess, I do have to assure you, you will have a croissant by the end of this long-term plan. So, and my goal is, we had 48 sessions last time round. We will have significantly less than that, but please bear with me. I think we're in the flour, water and mess stage. So with that, I will hand over to Carmen.
Okay, good afternoon, councillors. Thanks for the introduction, Amy. So you've heard a lot from Patrick and the team about all the reform context you need to hold in mind as we develop this long-term plan. But I just wanted to briefly recap on other contextual information you also need to be holding in mind as we have these workshops over the next few days and the next few months. So the first of these is that the long-term plan decisions should be connecting through to the decisions you've made so far, or the guidance you've provided so far in the strategic direction. So the strategic direction that you've key priorities, so catchment-based management and efficient delivery of our cost and future-ready accessible data and services. So you've set that through the strategic direction. We want to see that thread come through with the long-term plan discussions and decisions ahead. Oh, why is this is jumping? So the second of these is we do still have a timeline we have to work through. You've seen this slide before a number of times now. Key point is we're really at the start of the process in terms of the core part of developing the long-term plan. We're in July 2026. We have the next 4 to 5 months to work through this. We are trying to set out a very orderly process to take this through month by month as to the information we're getting through and building more detail month on month to help get to that croissant at the end of November. But we do have that time. If you feel there's something we are missing, not getting right, please let us know. We can adapt our approach where we need to. The other key piece of contextual information is just to remind you of the guidance that we received in the last workshop in June. Did you want to keep going? So at the June workshop, councillors told us that you wanted to focus on a service-focused transition-ready long-term planning process. Do you want me to take the question now, or
Can we just wait? Can we just wait for the
Yep. You gave us some initial preferences on where you wanted to improve, hold steady, or potentially look at reducing services, and we've built that information into the sessions you'll have today and tomorrow. And you also signalled that you wanted a 0 to very low interest total rates revenue increase for year 1 of the long-term plan and for future years. That was a very initial high-level guidance you gave us, but we're trying to keep that guidance at the forefront of the discussions for today and tomorrow and test with you once we get into the next level of detail, does that guidance still hold or not? And then just lastly, as Amy said, we do have a lot to get through today and tomorrow. We will give you some more financial context next, which Giles and Shannon will come and talk to. Then we will go into public transport options that we want to discuss, and then focus on the 30-year infrastructure strategy. Then that will tie in tomorrow until the first session, which is the community preparedness response to hazard core service and the services within it, and then environmental regulation and protection. We are trying to get through a lot in the next 2 days. Let's see how we go. We'll keep moving at pace, but the more direction and guidance you give us out of the next 2 days, the more we can shape up the coming workshops to be better for you as well. Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Can we start with Ashley?
I just want to go back to the LTP guidance provided so far page, most of which I agree. It sounds sensible to me, it sounds familiar to me. I want to test whether 0 was in what the consensus was. Because I remember, I mean, I was up the other end. I was above 5%, I think. But I do remember there being a significant consensus around low. I remember 1 or 2 outliers saying negative. I don't remember there being a consensus anywhere around 0. And so when I saw that, I just sort of saw, I'm prepared to be challenged if other people do remember a consensus around 0. But I remember, I mean, when we look at even the government's rate capping proposal has a minimum floor of 2. And so the 0 here, and there's another one further on in the presentation, makes no sense to me and is not my recollection. I admit that I didn't my preference didn't hold sway, but I do remember that it was low, not 0.
And thank you for that question. So for that exercise, there was one, as I recall it, one outlier that was sitting below 0. There were a number, majority clustered around 0, 1, 2, 3%. The average, as I recall, was 2.9%. And there was one outlier that was at the higher end. So we've tried to sort of, that's why we said 0 to low. Most of them were in that very low rates increase. So, but that's where, as we test what the reality of that means for the services and the work we deliver through these workshops and coming workshops, that's where councillors get to say, well, actually we provided that guidance, but now when we understand the reality of what that might mean, it might not be what you want. But that's the initial preference that was indicated. Happy to share the results of that in an email if that's helpful. But that's very initial guidance, and we have to test, does that really hold true or not?
Thank you. Councillor Gerard, did you still have a... Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Kia ora, joined by Shannon Bennett, Finance Manager. Grant is unfortunately ill at the moment. Shannon is more than able to stand in for. Just going to very quickly, I think it's really important that councillors have an appreciation of the financial context. Taking the comments that have just been made, we've obviously made a number of assumptions, and those are not true. They're just assumptions to illustrate where we currently are. So first and foremost, the numbers that we're using for the year just ended are draft unaudited and therefore are subject to change. There are a number of accounting changes that still be made, and also there will be potential audit changes that will happen. But so don't take the numbers as that's where we ended up last year. We have assumed for the purposes of this illustration a 0% rate rise for 27-28. It's just an assumption. We've also assumed for the following 2 years a 2% rates increase, which is, as you've indicated, Councillor Campbell, at the lower end of the rates capping proposals. And then we have also assumed a 3% increase for all income excluding rates and all expenditure. Again, a very broad and simple assumption, which undoubtedly will not be true. So again, this is illustrative rather than definitive. We have also assumed for the purposes of this illustration that there are no changes to service delivery, either increases or decreases. That will obviously be subject to council debate and decision over the next 12 months. We've made no trade-offs and we have assumed no efficiencies. So we're giving you a very simple picture of what the financial position may be. We've also made no allowance for any costs associated with transition. So there are a number of things that will change these numbers, both in a positive sense and in a negative sense. It's for illustrative purposes to provide a sense of what council should bear in mind as it is making decisions as we put together the draft long-term plan and then following that subject to consultation. What that results in over the next 10 years, which is clearly what the long-term plan is designed to do. If you look, the main thing to look at is the pink bits at the bottom. So we start off in the current year with a surplus. 26-27, we have a very, very small surplus, which, as you know, is almost a balanced budget. The surplus is primarily due to the RIF funding that we received late in the year. And then we move into deficit. And that deficit, given the assumptions that we've made, continues to increase. That's really important because obviously you need to set a balanced budget each year, and any deficit needs to be found from savings or increasing user pays or efficiencies, etc. And so if that holds true, we're not in a great position. And so that's important that we remember it. Also, there's been a lot of discussion around the fact that we've had surpluses for the last few years and how that has created significant funds that we could invest elsewhere. We're illustrating this by taking the three key reserves in relation to our overall financial management. And I'll just highlight for the purposes of this that in flood protection, we are aware that there are a number of flood management reserves, recognising that there are a number of schemes across the region. We've aggregated them for the purposes of this illustration, and we've netted off a significant debt that is associated particularly with the Waimakariri area. That therefore shows that at the end of 26-27, all other things being equal, based on the assumptions that we've made to date, we will end up negative, still negative 14 million. Public transport does look like it has significant reserves, but it can only be spent on public transport, can't be spent on anything else. And in actual fact, based on the assumptions and on the known plans and decisions that have been made, that will be at approximately 6 million by the end of 27-28. That is in line with the reserve policy, which is to provide for shocks. Now, those numbers, some of those assumptions may not come to fruition, but it shows you that actually what we're trying to illustrate here is there isn't a lot of money in the bank, even though we have generated surpluses in recent years. But it's also important to remember that when we do create surpluses or don't spend money, it can only be spent for the purpose for which it was raised. So if it's general rates, clearly it can be spent across the region. If it's targeted rate, it can only be spent on the reason that the targeted rate was collected. So there's not a lot of money in the bank. Again, come back to that earlier picture. We can't use reserves to prop up a deficit year on year on year on year. And then also just wanted to illustrate, Council recently in a workshop indicated a preference for services that they would want to increase, stay the same or reduce. And obviously there was a split of views on a number of those services. As you make decisions over the next few months, it's important to remember that in financial terms, not all services are equal. That if you make a 1% saving or a 10% saving in flood warning advisory, it's only 1% of our total costs. So it's actually not going to make a huge amount of difference. If, however, you were to look for savings or to increase expenditure by 1% in, at the other extreme, public transport, that has a major impact, both either positive or negative, on our overall position, but it doesn't impact all ratepayers equally. Obviously, as Councillor Mackenzie will quite often highlight, that public transport actually impacts the people of Christchurch. You change the funding there, you either benefit or you either charge the people of Christchurch more or you reduce the rates for the people of Christchurch, not for the rest of the region. So it's important in the context of the decisions that you make that you remember that changing and focusing on services that don't cost a lot of money is not going to have a huge impact on your overall rate take, although it may obviously impact on the services, which is what we're here to deliver. So just want to finish with some key messages. No surprise, rate rises below inflation will require savings to be found. And those will increase over time if we increase rates below inflation. Any increase in investment in any service will require savings need to be found in other areas. Again, it's kind of hopefully stating the obvious. There is limited or no funding in reserves that we can rely on, particularly in the medium and long term. A number of ways to address short-term funding issues is obviously to defer or delay work. Classic example is you defer maintenance, you defer repairs, you defer training, etc. Actually, that just postpones critical decisions into the future. Those costs need to be met at some point. If we want to achieve efficiencies or we want to achieve sustainable changes to our fundamental cost base as an organisation, those need to be planned and they take time to deliver. We cannot alter the cost base of the organisation from the 30th of June to the 1st of July. They take time to implement, often 6, 12, 18, 24 months. It's important to consider the indirect as well as the direct costs. If we remove or completely remove a particular service, we can remove the direct costs, but those indirect costs, which do make up a substantial proportion of the cost of a service, will just get spread across the other services and increase the costs of those. So we need to think about the whole cost. And as I said, not all services are equal, at least in financial terms.
I have a question, Giles. The increasing forecasted debt alongside the impending rates cap, is that affecting your ability to sleep?
I don't sleep very well anyway.
But you know the tenor
I
of my
mean,
question.
ultimately, it is a square that can't be circled or a circle that can't be squared at the moment. It is feeling like the financial pressures are growing like this, and that will come out in the public transport workshop, and I'm sure in others, and in conversations that councillors already had earlier today.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
I'd rephrase that actually, Chair, because I think that it's our ability to sleep with the decisions we make, not Giles's ability to sleep. Giles's ability to sleep with the advice he gets us in terms of what our position might be is a good question. But this is our stuff. This is council stuff. It's not staff stuff. They're giving us advice.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. But as an accountant, I worry about these things every day as well. Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Just a question about the inflation. What inflation index or indices do we use? It's clearly not CPI. But
We usually use Burl. We rely on a number of, it's the same that we do with interests. We look at a number of forecasts from people like Westpac, et cetera, so we do rely on industry standards. For the purposes of this, we've assumed on 3%. It seemed like a reasonable starting point, but
there are different indices for different industries. So
we use, for public transport, we use the NZTA index, and obviously we do rely on professional, reputable estimates. But as with all of these things, they tend to be wrong.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, then Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, just going back to your reserves, where you had the river reserves at minus $14 million in year 2. No, next year. That's accounting for commitments to capital expenditure, presumably, is it? Because the reserves actually aren't sitting at that at the moment. So you've netted off debt and commitment to capital expenditure, and haven't taken into account funding that's been put in place. Because I've been to, well, it's not all of them, but maybe 70% of the rating meetings, and if they've got capital expenditure coming in, then you've got, if there's co-funding as part of that, the expenditure's been met, but the long term for that river scheme might be that it goes into debt and then comes out, but the funding is in place to actually bring them out of deficit. So this, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, this -8, -14 is a sort of one way of reporting it. There are other ways you could report it.
It's a high-level illustrative example that takes account to the end of the current financial year of what we currently know. It doesn't project out, and we also recognise, as I said, that actually flood protection reserves are not a single. There are many of them, the biggest one being the Waimakariri, which is reported separately. For the purposes of this, we've added them together because actually we're not trying to look at, is this scheme sustainable? Is this scheme sustainable? There were the floods last week in Kaikoura. So it's illustrative, as all of this based on assumptions.
And I guess I would argue that actually if you showed the accounts for the reserves within the river scheme slightly differently, you could actually come up with a different number, but that's, and it's not particularly relevant to this discussion, but yeah. It'll come out in the CPRH meeting perhaps tomorrow.
As any good accountant.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mackay.
I think if you take the 20 mil off of the secondary stock bank, it'd make a bit of a difference to your figures, Ian. Staff, can you just be clear or provide some clarity for me anyway around indirect costs? As I understand it, that's the costs of staff and anything organisational. Can you just give us the broad outline of what actually falls into that?
So through our accounting systems, any staff working directly in a particular area will be charged directly to that, and so will direct costs of the goods and services in those areas. Any other costs are allocated across on a proportionate basis. So, for example, the vehicles that we use are not allocated directly to individual services, even though they are proportionately used by. We allocate them across the cost of our digital services, the cost of the cost of this building, the cost of our consumables, all of those costs that are not direct. And what you'll see, and it's quite illustrative with public transport, the indirect costs are actually relatively low because most of the costs of public transport are contract payments to Kinetic and Ritchie's. So therefore, they actually don't absorb a lot of indirect costs, but there are still some in turn that need to be allocated. So all of our technology, our buildings, equipment, etc., is all of the executive time, senior management time is spread across on a proportionate basis. And one of the things we know that we need to do, for council, but particularly in the context of transition, is be much clearer about what those indirect costs are, which ones would be appropriate to allocate more directly to a particular service if it was moved, and which ones wouldn't. So, for example, our HR function or our finance function, those are overheads or indirect costs to the organisation. It's unlikely those full costs would transfer to any future unitary. Some of them might, but most organisations already have a finance team or an HR team or a CFO or a chief executive or a director of comms, etc.
So supplementary, if I may. So just with regard to the authorisations and compliance, the indirect cost includes user pays. Is that correct?
Assuming that the user pays will have been netted off the direct costs, so i.e. the net cost, direct cost of the service. But so rather than saying it's an indirect cost, it will be netted off. Cost of providing the service less user pays gives the cost of the service. Then we add on indirect costs.
Netted off of the direct, not the indirect. Netted off of the direct costs.
Thank you, Councillor Giro. Okay, three questions. So just to the page 12 with pest management, 2026-27, we got 3 million. I thought, is that not include the wallabies funding? I thought we had some reserves to.
So this is the reserves position, and obviously council recently made a decision to allocate an additional million, wasn't it? That will be netted off in terms of, yeah. So this is based on the annual plan for 26-27, what we know, and therefore forecasting out to the end of the year. I would assume that if we came back and look at these numbers in 12 months' time, they will be slightly different because it's our plan and known information today.
And next question is, it's really to do with page 11. Or just really generally, what would be the influencing factors that could affect our credit rating?
A range of factors that impact our credit rating, in particular our ability to repay debt, and the fact that we have a very strong balance sheet with low borrowing are the main things. Our audit results will also be other things. There's a list of things that are included in our credit rating. And then as we reported, particularly to the audit committee, influenced by the national position, which has resulted in a slight downgrading because of the national economic status, but no reflection of the strong financial performance of this organisation over recent years.
If we kept to the graph on page 11, that would start affecting, if we get more and more into debt, that would start affecting our credit rating, or it's
one of many factors that would be taken into account. Ultimately, if we increased our borrowing, we have some significant headroom in terms of our borrowing, but also some of the things that we might need to do could be very expensive.
Yeah, and so page 13, just with the data, information, advice, and authorisations, do you think will we be briefed on those subjects? I don't really know a lot about, how our systems, well, at a governance level, whether we've got some decision making around those areas or not. And I mean, look, we're focusing on other areas. I'm just wondering if we need.
Ultimately, authorisations and compliance, which is consents and monitoring and enforcement, is subject to user pays, subject to the RMA reforms. There's, that is an area that there is significant uncertainty about in terms of the future. This is the costs based on the current annual plan, as we understand them, based on assumptions about how much user pays will we recover, and the costs of the staff involved in that system, and an assumption about how many applications we get in and how much monitoring we do.
It's just around data, information, and advice. It's an item. Yeah. So we've got direct costs being 14 million. It's sort of like, what does that involve? What does that look like? And so just sort of.
So it's mainly the work that the science team do in terms of environmental data and environmental research, collecting that data, supporting our consents and monitoring team, and also providing that environmental picture. So that's mainly those costs.
I'll just add that there is a workshop that is planned in the future on those.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
So broadly, page 13, am I right in thinking direct costs, or direct money rather, is where, it's from rates, and then the indirect costs is when comes from, no? Where's the...
So direct costs are the costs of, simplistically, they're the direct costs of the staff who work at the front line on delivering that service, and the associated contracts that are 100% part of delivering that service. So if we outsource wilding conifers or wallaby eradication, those contracts will be direct costs. Indirect costs are those costs of running the organisation, all of the things that are needed to support the delivery of that service. So the cost of governance, the cost of communications, the cost of our technology systems, the cost of our finance team, part of the cost of our science team, part of the cost of our strategy and planning team, all are required to allow that work to happen. Those are the indirect costs of an organisation.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And so I guess indirect costs apportionment between work streams must be a bit of an exact science or estimate, because obviously a comms department helps all of them to varying degrees, and same with finance, payroll. So the more clear ones will be the direct costs, I guess, the more measurable.
Indirect costs are allocated on a number of bases depending on what's most appropriate. It could be the number of staff, it could be the total direct costs of that service. There are a number of bases for allocating those costs on a sensible basis. It's not 100% accurate representation.
Thank you, and thank you, finance team. That was delightful. We might move on now to public transport.
I think I'll probably stay. Want to do the click?
Some of the bottom ones.
Okay, Stuart, take it away.
Kia ora koutou. Keeping with the food analogies, public transport, we are the pain au chocolat the croissant family, or the vanilla cream croissant, actually equally as delicious and interesting. Hopefully you will have received a bunch of pre-reading and you've done your homework and read this before today. We sent that out to give you some background information rather than boring you with a whole bunch of slides in this session. Because as you'll see around the wall, we've got some questions to ask you and some sticky dots to apply so you can get up and move around and get the blood flowing. So we're going to spend about 15 minutes just going through some sort of summarised context and questions to shape your thinking around answering these key questions around the wall. And the intention behind that is to give us some guidance and direction so we can shape a draft long-term plan that makes sense for the environment that you're wanting to achieve and that is actually deliverable. Okay, so you had a workshop a few weeks ago, which was discussed earlier today, understanding whether you're wanting to hold steady, improve or reduce various services. And for public transport, the two key services, bus and ferry services and the community transport, total mobility, came out looking a bit like this. And so for bus and ferry, there was a general vibe around hold steady or improve. And for the community transport, total mobility space, to hold steady or reduce in that area. So we're going to give you some background information to help sort of add some flavour to that conversation ahead of these questions. We're going to challenge you to think about what is the rate envelope that you're comfortable operating within for public transport, and what sort of investment posture you might want to take in the context of improving or holding steady in the public transport space, or indeed reducing. And then ultimately, because public transport is jointly funded by Canterbury Regional Council and NZTA, what your risk appetite might be should the NZTA proportion of that funding not meet our expectations to enable you to deliver the outcomes you're seeking. So those are three broad fundamental elements that we kind of need to get a sense of from you so we can shape what we bring back. From a context point of view, as has been mentioned in the presentations earlier, public transport makes up a significant proportion of Canterbury Regional Council's budget, something around 47%, $170 million at the moment, and the vast majority of that is long-term committed expenditure on long-term contracts, bus contracts, ferry contracts, which last for 9 years. That's the biggest component. The next biggest component would be total mobility, as you know, which is a consumption-based model, which we don't really control that. There's been some changes that came into play on 1 July, and our expectation is that will moderate that consumption rate this year. But then once that settles into a new norm, we expect to see it to start to grow again as more customers start to use the service, unless some other changes happen. And then the other two major costs components of public transport beyond those two elements were the indirect costs, as Giles was talking about before, and then finally labour costs for the team that delivers PT. So that's kind of the layers that cost for PT. We know in the public transport context that there's lots of uncertainty around funding, so we're going to touch on that here. As I said, you've signalled some intentions to improve or hold steady for the bus contract stuff and ideally reduce the community transport aspect. And we've got this transition period coming up where right now, as has already been talked about, we don't quite know yet what the landscape might hold and how we might transition public transport. Lots of options, but those, depending on which options we land on, will influence the nature of the service construct that we end up with. So why are we having this conversation in the first place? As you know, we've had a big engagement with our community last month, over 6 weeks, and got quite a large response, probably the largest engagement response we've had for many, many years for Canterbury Regional Council. And that sort of gives you a sense of the interest in this topic for our community and the desire of many in our community to have a better public transport service. The feedback will no doubt reflect the desire of some of our community not to have a better public transport service as well. So we will hear all voices in that. We know that our network at the moment is 16% smaller than what it was pre-earthquake. And hence, we have gaps, and we've talked about gaps. In fact, we're going to trial filling one of those gaps shortly in Aranui, and you made a decision around that. What's interesting to reflect on with that is since the earthquakes, our urban environment has grown significantly, and Greater Christchurch is enjoying a bit of a renaissance. We've got our mojo back. It's the place to be. It's where things are happening. And of course, when you take account of the growth in Greater Christchurch post-earthquake and the fact that our network is 16% smaller than what it was pre-earthquake, then the gap is much larger. And our ability to meet the demands of our community is much harder. And that's the last point I wanted to make there is we've seen significant urban growth, not only in housing, in intensification, in employment, in social activity, in population, and our network just hasn't kept up with that. So that's why this conversation is quite important at the moment. Give you a sense of current state so you can feel good about what you've been doing over the last few years. Patronage for this fiscal year ending 30 June, 15.2 million. So that's just under 1% growth on last year, but 10% on the pre-COVID number. So Greater Christchurch is one of the few large urban centres in New Zealand who saw positive growth against pre-COVID. Both Wellington and Auckland have yet to reach pre-COVID numbers, although the fuel crisis has helped them along with that, which is good. We've implemented a few service uplifts to respond to community needs, most recently Route 7, and we've seen a 14% uplift in patronage on that route, and Route 84, 85, a trial, 41% growth on that route. So we know there's demand out there if we can meet it. The latest Metro user survey, the hot off the press, first to hear this, 96% customer satisfaction with our service, which is a great outcome given all the trials and tribulations we've been going through in recent times. So very, very happy about that. Economically, we had a target of 13% private revenue. That was a new measure placed upon PTAs, public transport authorities, by the government 18 months ago. And we're currently at 17%. So great result there. Now that's driven by several things. Good fiscal decision making around being careful about what we spend our money on. Some bad news about not getting NZTA share, so we couldn't do some things. The changes in our fares pricing, which drove more fare revenue. So all of those things have contributed to that really good outcome. However, we're seeing growing decline in our service reliability. So it's quite likely that this fiscal year we won't achieve our target for reliability measure. And there's a bunch of things that's contributing to that. But of course, the economy is well, it's tough for people. Christchurch seems to be going very, very well right now. And that's something to reflect on when we think about how we might want to manage PT going forward. We've got a bunch of constraints that are going to influence your decision making. We know local funding is going to be challenged, and we've just heard about a window of 0 to low percent. So that's going to be interesting. We know that in the National Land Transport Fund is the cupboard's pretty bare there at the moment and likely to be barer in the next 3 years. However, we've got a really strong community expectation for more service and more frequency and more access. And so all of those things create risk to our budgeted thinking and assumptions we make. So the more clarity you can provide us, the better we can give you a plan that makes sense. And then we talked about transition. The last piece on the slide is the MRT alignment. So a big piece of work that Christchurch City Council is largely delivering, and we are helping to support and fund. However, none of that funding is coming from central government at the moment. And when you look at the infrastructure pipeline and the funding for infrastructure nationally, that is very challenged right now. So indications are that that project may be quite a few years away. So a question we need to ask ourselves in this LTP is that one of those things that we park and push down the road, or do we keep doing it to be ready for when funding might be available? What's interesting about that is if we don't do any of our PT Futures service uplifts, then there is no point in doing this work, because you can't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
The PT Futures is the precursor and the enabler of the MRT. So if we're unable to do those foundational things, then there's little point in investing money in MRT right now. That's been the fun part of the conversation. The challenging part of the conversation now is the money. So in this pack, we've given you a bunch of detail on 4 buckets of money. The first bucket is the must-dos to keep the lights on. So in order to keep running the network we currently have and do nothing else, we expect a 2% rate increase just to stand still. And that's driven from 2 primary things. As of 1 July next year, road user charges will be applied to EV fleet. So there's $2.5 million straight away there that we can't do anything about. And then, of course, inflation, we've assumed a 3% inflation rate. Can't do much about that. The next one, keep the lights on, should do. These are things that we've got a desire to do to optimise our network and improve within the footprint we have. And then thirdly, you've already made some commitments on service uplifts. You've made some commitments to support Route 1 and 5 uplifts, assuming government meet their share. You've made some commitments to do Route 84 and 85. And as we know, it's very difficult to turn things off once you've turned them on. And you've made some commitments to do a service in Aranui. And then finally, there's the Christmas list of things that would be really cool to do if we had the capacity to do it, and that's about our future and responding to our community feedback for more service. So that all adds up to a reasonable sum of money, but ultimately these are choices for council to make. So we're going to ask you to think about what sort of posture you want to take for your draft LTP. Do you want to be just keep the lights on? Do you want to do a small amount of improvement, the stuff you've already committed to, or do you want to test a wider level of investment? That's kind of framing the conversation now. I'll stop there for some questions, and then we're going to ask you a bunch of questions and get you to give us a steer.
Thank you, team. I'm just very aware of the time, and I'm loving this discourse, but if we can ask our questions quite quickly, just sort of put yourself on double speed, that would be great. And we'll start with Councillor Campbell.
2 questions, one of which I sent through yesterday that I thought would fit really well into this conversation, which was a question that was sent to me, given the communications. He was talking about something Dion said in a meeting here with Bishop, indicate that increasing frequency on bus routes is not super costly, but could lead to much higher service usage. Is there data about doing this for the whole network? And if not, could an analysis be done? So basically, do we have any idea of what it would cost to increase frequency on the whole network?
Yep, essentially that's the work we're currently doing on the 10-year improvement programme. So the network review, the community consultation will all come to create that 10-year plan. Yeah.
The second question, really quick, looking at the slide, current state Greater Christchurch reliability is declining. A lot of that we don't have control over, do we? Like, we can't control bus lanes or light phasing or anything like that. What can we do to improve that? And are we having serious conversations with Christchurch City Council about working together to make that much better?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's three things that influence the reliability of our service at the moment. The first one is just the level of activity in our city today has generated a whole much more traffic on the road and corridors. Got way more congestion now than we've ever had in the past. And we are fighting for road space on those congested roadways during peak times. Christchurch City in particular are focused on enabling bus priority through bus lanes, etc., but they need funding to do that, and that hasn't come through for them. There is a business case joined to our 1 of 5 that they're going to put in, so that's one of the challenges there. The second one relates to road maintenance. Road maintenance happens in the summer, and this summer has been one of the biggest maintenance programs that the city has undertaken for some very good reasons. They've been doing maintenance on the road corridor and also on underground services, Three Waters infrastructure, which has been really needed. And that has had a material impact on our network this summer because of the scale and quantum of it. But you've got to do that work. You can't not do that work. I was trying to think of the third. I can't think of the third one at the moment. But we are working with Christchurch City Council on how we can try to influence where their road working happens and the timing of it, so all of our network doesn't get clobbered at once. The things that we can do is to moderate our timetables. However, in order for us to do that, we either write our timetables to accommodate the current traffic system and be reliable in that traffic system. That requires us, we want to keep the headways and frequencies we have now. That will require us to add more buses and more driver hours, which costs money, which we don't have. The alternative is that we reduce the frequency and level of service so we just fit with the assets we've got. Our view would be counterproductive because our customers are craving for more service, not less. So we're better off tolerating the reliability issues and doing what we can around the edges, the optimisation work that we've talked about, to try and sort of mitigate some of those issues.
Thank you. We've got a number of questions to go, and we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. So we'll go Councillor Robinson, Mackay, Mackenzie, Davis, then Gerard, but just very quickly, please.
Ashley had one of my questions anyway about the declining thing. So a lot of it's out of control, So I've just got a question regarding the road user charges looking forward. Is there a case potentially for an exemption or at least a reduction in the road user charges for public good?
So we've been benefiting from an exemption for the last 5 years for EVs. It was delayed. It was supposed to come into play this fiscal year, and government delayed it by a year. So I think we've had our sort of free period of time. Yeah.
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. Interesting presentation, looking mainly at a rates increase. When are we going to have that opportunity to look at fares again? And I know that we've made a decision before, and particularly the change coming in when the NRT whatever the new card process. But also, can we actually go back and look at some of our concessions? For example, we made decisions earlier on where we gave gold card users a concession from 3 to 6. At the time, we were advised that the cost to the organisation would be about 70,000, if my memory serves me correct. I think we've had some information, well, we have had information subsequent to that it's considerably more. So I'm just wondering, when would we get the opportunity to look at those two levers?
So council will be given some information this side of Christmas on a fare review. So council committed to doing a fare review annually with an implementation period of February. So you're going to get that opportunity. We're going to come to you with some scenarios for the next step change in fares, and that will also consider concessions and how you might want to deal with those, and also whether you want to consider more targeted zones as well.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that it's not going to bring in 10.6 mil rates, but and it'll only be a small fry really compared to that. But it's something that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie.
Well, very, very briefly, my question was sort of similar to Claire's. Why not double fare recovery, and why are we imposing the increase in costs and the expectations of service on rates as opposed to users? And concessions as part of that, but actually, yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. I guess at the end of the day, council needs to decide what outcome it's chasing. Is it chasing an economic outcome? In which case you could increase the fares substantially and that would reduce your costs. At some point in time, as we know, when we increase fares, we reduce patronage. At some point in time, you get to a point of diminishing returns. You get to a point where the fares are so high that the revenue you increase that you might get starts to be a revenue reduction because you've bled so much patronage. But the modelling suggests that's a wee way away. So if you want to increase fares, as we've seen, we increased fares a year ago and we see patronage decline, although the fuel situation has brought people back because there's a cost benefit there. But that is one of the levers that you have to pull.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Just very, very quickly.
On the bucket slide, the 4 different things, I want to know, are we scratching the surface of PT Futures in that one, next one, go on to the buckets, to the money, right there. Okay. I want to know where the bus lanes and the sort of that type of service, where is that in there?
So we don't carry any costs for infrastructure. So bus lanes, we don't fund those. Christchurch City Council funds those. We fund service only. So one of the, it's a good question to ask. One of the things that's in the bucket here is the MRT question. One could argue at the moment the work that's being done on MRT is corridor protection work, which is not about delivering service. It's about preparing the ground to deliver a service, if you like. And so that's not really our jam. However, Canterbury Regional Council is participating as a partner at the moment by providing funding. So we are rating Christchurch City residents so we can give Christchurch City Council money to do the work they are doing on protecting the corridor. So one could argue that an option for our council would be to say, well, why don't we reduce our rate take of Christchurch City ratepayers? Christchurch City Council increases their rate take for that same amount of money, so it's neutral for the ratepayer. But we don't have to carry that cost.
Because I'm thinking PT Futures, the key here is we want to have a more streamlined service and more people will take it. So we're stuck. And so if I was someone who wanted to support PT Futures, would I vote for all of that, or would I just go for keep the lights on, should do, or you know what? This is my question.
Sorry, I just need to make a point to clarification. This doesn't include the cost of PT Futures improvements. So essentially, keeping the lights on is to maintain existing levels of service. Then we've got improvements that we want to do just more in general. We need a bit of a steer in terms of how we scale the PT Futures improvement program. We could go big, we could go smaller, we kind of need to scale it, which is why the cost isn't included in there yet. And so when we talk to which public transport package should staff develop, we're trying to get a steer of essentially, are we in the game of improvements for PT Futures? I would very much hope we are. And then looking at actually from a rating impact, what does that look like so we can scale that programme? And the scale and pace of delivery obviously has a cost implication.
Thank you. We'll very quickly go to Councillor Gerard, then Deputy Chair Cranwell and Councillor Scott, but each question, please, has to be about 20 seconds long because we're grossly over time. Thank you.
So the developers doing the fast track projects, is there any mechanism that we could get some contribution from them to help service public services to them?
In the current environment that we operate in, developer contributions are for infrastructure only. They are not allocated for operating costs, which is what we have. So no, we don't get any.
Thank you.
Could we lobby government for that? Could we lobby central government for that change?
Thank you, Deputy Chair Cranwell.
Chair Stewart, quick clarification. So option A is just must do, is that right? Yeah. Option B is must do and service improvements, or is it the first three?
So the top row is just standing still. The second row is standing still with optimisation. The third row is committing to the decisions you've already made, Route 1 and 5, 84, 85, Aranui. And the last row is preparing us for potential PT Futures work, which hasn't been costed there, as Sonia said.
So, I mean, all of it C, top is just A. I'm just trying to work out what B is on the next slide. Maintain and optimise. Is it? Yeah.
I understand now. Yep, so that would be the first two rows. If I read what maintain and optimise, committed, and it's the first three rows because it says committed service improvements. Yeah, the first three rows.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to our PT workshop activity that we can mainly, hopefully, do really quickly. Yep. Thank you, team.
Exciting.
Okay, I'll give you a quick overview. So we're going to capture responses to 6 questions. So you'll see we've got 6 sheets around the room. So 2 to 3 people per question. You'll have, I was going to say 3 minutes.
1 minute. 2 minutes.
You've got two minutes to place your sticky dot. There is one exception to the rule because there always is. The question there around how should we explain the gaps between community aspirations and affordability. We're looking for thoughts on a sticky note. So you've got 5 sticky dots, no expense spared. We're there to support you and we can answer some questions as we go around. A couple of rules, 1 dot per question. You can't... Please make the dots visible so you can't stick them on top of each other's dots. And no halving dots. It's a one thing. And once we've kind of had 2 minutes, you'll then move clockwise to the next question. So it's going to be fast and rapid.
Let's
go. Good luck.
Just want to check people's availability. We are going over, and we'd quite like to get this today wrapped up today. Yes, it is till 4:30. Is there a possibility to go to 4:45? So I'm hearing no. Because if everyone else is comfortable, I'd like to just get this through and carry on, because we've got a lot of our work schedule ahead of us. So we'll carry on. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Chair. We're going to do this very efficiently for you. So my name's Lee Griffiths, General Manager of Hazards, and I have with me Sean McCracken, our Chief Engineer, and Nick Bryant, who's our Principal Strategy Advisor, who's holding the pen on the strategy. We're going to go through it reasonably quickly. Nick's going to lead us through the slides. Sean and I are here for questions. Two key things. This is a really important document, not only for us locally for transition, but also for Before the Deluge and our national pipeline of work. So it's important we get it right. And you'll pick up as we go through a key change from last time is we have put all our assets from our hazards core service in the strategy, which we thought was a sensible thing to propose. So I will pass straight to Nick.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Thank you, Lee. Yes, as Lee said, I'm Principal Strategy Advisor in the Strategy and Planning team, and this is my first time at the table, so I'm really pleased to be here now. I will try and skip the slides. I did just make a note of which ones I'll try and talk to. So I will skip over quite a lot of slides in the interests of speed.
Appreciate it.
And I was going to do a pause and discuss the content in two stages, but I think I'll just whip right through, and we'll just stop once at the end for questions and discussion and feedback. Thank you. So the statutory strategy is a statutory requirement under the LGA. Its statutory purpose is to identify significant infrastructure issues and the approach that we intend to take as a council to managing them. The focus of this session will be on the context and issues in the first part of that purpose, and then in subsequent sessions we'll cover the forward investment picture, so not quite as advanced as the PT presentation we've just had. As Lee mentioned, there's a statutory requirement to include our flood protection and control works. That's the only type of asset that must be included, but it is proposed to take a more holistic CPRH core service approach in line with the direction and the strategic direction. That will cover assets protecting people and property around or on the water. We'll take a 30-year investment horizon, but a 100-year lens on issues, reflecting the long-term nature of those assets. Given the reform context, the strategy will basically build on the 2024 LTP direction with no major deviation in strategic approach, but we will have a focus on supporting smooth transition of services and assets through the reform processes. Broadly speaking, what that means in terms of the assets to be included is our land holdings, which are mostly river and river surrounds, floodplain. The river and drainage schemes we manage, including associated structures and vegetation, and the hazard warning systems that we operate. So that's the context, that's an introduction to the legislative requirements and the strategy. There's a lot more information in the briefing pack for you to refer to. Moving into the strategic context for the infrastructure strategy and how that's changed since the 2024 LTP was prepared. I'll just note at this point, there's nothing in these slides on the impact of the flooding event last week. These were prepared while that was live, or probably before that was a live event. That will obviously need to be taken into consideration. So it's a gap in this presentation, but rest assured that will be taken. We'll think about the impacts of that as the strategy is developed. Probably the most significant change since 2024 has been the attraction of central government co-funding. That's enabled a lot of the projects in the 2024 work programme to be brought forward and delivered earlier in the 10-year period of the current LTP. With government funding contributing 60% of the cost of that. That's also improved the affordability of the works for the ratepayer and potentially creates a bit of headroom in moving forward. There have been some costs to that, I suppose you could say. The prioritisation of our resources to on-the-ground delivery for the central government funding to deliver that in the timeframe required, and to make repairs following flood damage in 2021. That has meant that the programme of scheme reviews outlined in the 2024 strategy have fallen behind. These reviews really form a critical step in the planning for the longer term, identifying where issues will emerge and over what timeframes, potential options to address those, and the associated investment needs. Without those, there's a bit of a knowledge gap, and they are really a sort of a key input to inform the third-year infrastructure strategy. So we will look to what we can do to address that shortcoming in our delivery of long-term planning. Since 2024, Council's adopted 2 strategies that set out the long-term direction for our rivers and how we work in them, as well as how we manage our land holdings to optimise outcomes. So these strategies now provide an overarching strategic direction for the community and environmental outcomes that wasn't in place when the 2024 LTP was done. So as part of the infrastructure strategy, as part of the LTP, in the right-hand triangle of that diagram there, it is an operational strategy that supports delivery of some elements of those key direction-setting documents. And given that the Council has already set that direction through those strategies, it's proposed that the outcomes and objectives for the third-year infrastructure strategy are just aligned directly to ensure consistency between strategic direction and operational strategy. If that approach is pursued, we would effectively pull through the directly relevant objectives and just augment that with a handful of more operational infrastructure-specific outcomes. So as part of the LTP, the strategy, the LGA requires that the strategy outlines a most likely scenario, what is the future that we're planning for, and the assumptions on which that's based. So there will be a series of assumptions that are set at an LTP level. I think there was a question earlier on inflation and where those assumptions come from. The infrastructure strategy will need to fully align to those other macro level assumptions as being part of the whole of the LTP. So the assumptions on growth, context and system changes, they'll be pulled through directly from the broader LTP process. But they will need to be augmented with some infrastructure specific assumptions, and those will relate largely to levels of service, climate change, resource availability specific to infrastructure delivery, and assets and their condition and future and life expectancy. So this slide just presents what we think are is the initial set of most important assumptions. There may be some localized exceptions to that, and where we know that, we'd obviously need to document those. Another aspect, which is, if you recall, is one of the 2 purposes of the strategy, is to identify significant issues. And we've already been through a process to identify an initial draft of what they would look like through a desktop review of key documents, as well as conversations and internal workshops with relevant experts. And that process has identified a number of drivers of demand, shown in this word map in the blue, supply constraints in the green, and then other factors that really affect efficient delivery of services, things that add a cost, a barrier or risk to how we deliver our infrastructure. And when those are mapped, they form 4 really clear clusters of significant issues: community expectations, climate change, and those are largely driving demand; affordability, which is largely a supply constraint; and business capability, and that is where most of the structural costs and barriers lie. So that is all I'm going to say. I hope that was quick enough. Really appreciating feedback.
Thank you. I just want to applaud you. That was a masterclass in efficiency in simplifying local government in 7 minutes. It was outstanding. Are there any questions? Councillor Campbell.
Looking at the grouping of significant infrastructure issues, I see down there on climate change, you've got insurance retreat. And I'm just trying to interpret what this means for us. And can I confirm, would insurance retreat add a cost to us, or is it simply a community cost that's going to apply everywhere and we've just got to be aware of it?
Yeah, primarily the latter. We don't have any insurance for our assets, so it's not an operational cost that's likely, or something that we currently buy that's likely to disappear. So it's really about the increasing number of households and businesses or landowners that can't get insurance, that are in risky areas, that will then look to us potentially to increase the level of infrastructure protection provided to them.
Councillor Moody.
Thanks. The top of the same page, 50, significant infrastructure issues. In the purple there it says as a acceptance of nature-based flood reduction methods as a cost or barrier. Does that mean that the fact that people don't yet accept it widely as a cost or barrier to us being able to use that method, which would be helpful in some?
Yeah, that's probably not very well quantified. I did go looking for it, to see what evidence there was out there for that. It's something that came up from feedback internally. It's really about having a level of understanding that about how those systems work, so that it gives the community confidence that that is actually going to protect them when the rains come. So it's an education gap, I suppose, in terms of giving us license to deliver those types of assets to deliver the community outcomes that we're seeking to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm a bit concerned about business capability and what that actually brings to the fore when you look at, and if you link that to community expectations, there's some stuff there that we've known about for some time in terms of our river management. I thought our asset management system was world-leadingly, but you're still concerned about it, obviously. But those things about river engineering skill shortage, we've known about that for some time. And so what are we? Is it our responsibility, but what are we, or what is Te Rukahika doing about that? Because it seems to be, it's like if we're 20 oncologists short, we'd be out in the streets there in the square. But the community expectations thing is also there. If we've got these things happening in terms of our infrastructure, then do we need to do more about it? Do we need to be more proactive about addressing those? And the one that I'm really quite concerned about is the scheme reviews. We know in South Light we've got some issues there, and we've pointed those out. And when we have our rating meetings, it's about, look, we're doing what we need to do just to keep the lights on here. And that concerns me also. So, it's a big question, but there's some stuff there that we should be thinking about, I think.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, thanks. And I was going to make more of a comment than a question, and it deals with what you just asked, Peter. But community, what are the things that have changed since we last did a significant review of our 30-year infrastructure? And I think that is that community expectations are changing as community investment, as infrastructure in various communities changes significantly. And so that requires a high degree of prioritisation within our 30-year infrastructure plan, because there are some areas that have higher levels of expectation. And I would suggest that the Waimak district is one of those because of the urbanisation that's going on. The second issue that's perhaps slightly changing now is climate change and the severity of some of these climate events. And then the third issue that we need to consider is affordability and how we pay for these things. And we've already started to introduce a strategy around moving away from small river, especially small river rating schemes, to a district-wide or regional-wide rating funding system. But the added change to that is the co-funding, which is then saying to communities, well, the central government saying we'll give you 60% of your fund if you can come up with the rest of the money, and that's having a profound effect on some of the smaller schemes. So those three major changes that are happening, and so then when it comes to scheme reviews, I think my observation would be, and I haven't got an answer for this, is that actually the scheme reviews aren't what the scheme reviews were maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we did a scheme review. They're now more of a district-wide review as to how we do catchment management on a whole, as opposed to just reviewing a river rating scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we can think about that as we can consider 30-year infrastructure, I think that'd be useful.
Definitely food for thought. I'll move to Councillor Davis.
Well, that was kind of what I was thinking about, the scheme review. So we're not talking about a review of the major rivers or secondary rivers. We're talking a river rating scheme? Okay. Right. Is that a priority? I don't know. Anyway, that was my question. And I was just thinking, if we're doing a scheme review, do we add land purchases and nature-based solutions into these reviews, just to give us that lead into more events? Are you guys all over that?
I've written a few notes here. Scheme reviews, first of all, I'll touch on that. In the existing infrastructure strategy, we've split that into a Part A and a Part B. Part A is focusing purely on, is the scheme hydraulically performing the function that we've defined it to perform, and so those have been completed in the last round for the Ashley and the Selwyn rivers, and Kaikoura as well. Thank you. And then Part B is arguably the harder part, which broadly is how are we doing the work, and that's that gets into the future thinking of what could this scheme be in the future. What does the community now expect that the community 30 years ago didn't expect? So those broader questions. And we expect that as we go through that will be the place where we'll identify opportunities for change, for retreat, for land purchase, for doing things differently, whether it's different vegetation, different gravel management, whatever it may be for the scheme. So, but we've been focusing on delivery, and so that hasn't happened. That's just the reality of where we are. What else did I want to talk about? Quality people, Councillor Scott, across Te Iri Kahika, across the country. The thinking a couple of years ago was that our big looming crisis was the experienced heads retiring, and we've done some work to try and quantify that, and that's not the case. But there is still a need to bring in the new generation, expand the quality of people in this workforce. So there's a whole work stream across the country focused on that, and I'm the lead for that. And so we're looking at how we build training opportunities for people already in the industry, and opportunities for people to come in and sort of entice them into this work.
Can I suggest to you that would it be an idea for the LTP to have a scholarship process put in place? It wouldn't be a lot of money to encourage young people to do that. We've got an engineering department here in Christchurch, which obviously could facilitate some of that. So would that be any sort of an idea at all?
I guess we can have a think about that and have a chat with Lee and David behind me on that. Of course, part of the cost is the scholarship and the student themselves, and part of the cost is the time and cost of mentoring that student. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you. Just going to the business capability component there, and I noticed all but one are in purple, and I look at it from the risk and audit perspective, where everything has been assessed as being performing well. But I look at overdue flood protection scheme reviews, insufficient asset data, outdated asset management systems, and I'm going, whoa, are we as good as what we've been indicating?
Good question, thank you. We're rated 3 out of 5 for asset management, so our asset management system is adequate, but it could be a lot better. Our software is adequate, but doesn't really meet our business needs, which means there's flow on to the finance cycle and the data cycle linked to GIS and that type of thing. The scheme review one, we're looking at how we can accelerate that, particularly in the next 2 years going into reform. And certainly Dave and I have been having some chats about what that might look like, either in terms of some external resource to catapult some of these things forward and get them done. Sean can't do everything. We've now got him leading a flood recovery, and this is what trips us up every time is our resource, which is limited internally. Gets diverted to other things. So we're looking at how we can catch up as well as possibly do some more there. So I wouldn't see it as a major risk, but it's certainly somewhere where we know we need to get back on track.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard and then Deputy Chair Cranwell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just looking at this here, and with our effective catchment-based management and stewardship from the mountains to the sea. So here, I guess it's sort of like, it's a hard thing to put money to, but there will be integration with this core service with biodiversity and biosecurity and water quality, and management of water allocation as well, wouldn't there? Is that, how do we, and how does that work in a long-term plan?
So one of the main ways we've addressed ensuring our flood infrastructure, both hard and soft, is integrated with environmental outcomes was the development of our 100-year Braided River Revival Strategy. So this strategy sits underneath that one. It's the wee triangle that Nick popped up before. We're not dealing with water quantity in here, but it, if through improvements to our data sets and that type of thing for our flood assets, there could be flow-on effects for managing other data better going forward. But there's nothing in here that directly I was going to say interferes. I'm trying to say it stands alone and it doesn't. What am I trying to say?
Do you want me to? I'll try. I think the TIS is an operational strategy and it's about our infrastructure assets, and they are primarily to protect property, but how you deliver them, there are opportunities to do that in ways which can harm those other outcomes or can be beneficial for it. And so there would always be, you'd always be looking to optimise the outcomes across the across those different outcomes when you're looking at specific pieces of intervention at the design level, but at the strategy level, the primary goal here would be protecting property and people. We're protecting people and property so that from that flood and or hazard risk.
So when we're doing a long-term plan, to make it our strategic priority visible, maybe it's more of a strategy planning question rather than maybe it's the next level up that I'm asking for, but it's really how do we see that we're going to meet the outcome of our strategic priority? That this is part of. So I'm just...
So with the proposal to bring those strategic outcomes through from the overarching outcome strategies, I would call them, or community-facing strategies, into here. We would be trying to pick all of the ones that are relevant. So if through our work in infrastructure we can impact positively or negatively, depending on how we do it, on one of those outcomes, then we would need to bring that. We'll aim to bring that through into this strategy, so it's reflected. But it will not have all elements, because you can only deliver so much through the infrastructure that we're responsible for delivering under the statute in terms of achieving those whole catchment outcomes. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
When you see drafts as we go down the track, if there's outcomes in the Braid River revival strategy that you don't see reflected in here that you think could be delivered through our work, then call us out on it.
Thank you. Deputy Chair Cranwell.
Kia ora, it's probably been answered, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Sean, so just Councillor Davis, Andrea talked about, you talked about Part A and Part B, and I suppose Part B is hard, and using Lee's terms, catapult forward. How do we get to Part B? How do we make sure we bring those through forward? I know.
Time, resource, reprioritisation. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as we move into the next step, where we look at what are the investment needs, we will have a transition focus, as I said, and so I would think we would be bringing to you options to enable us to address some of those gaps, and rough cost order of what they will be, so that in the last session you just had with public transport, you can decide whether or not you want to put more resource into those things to address some of these shortcomings.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions before we wrap for the day? No. Oh, Chair Swiggs.
Yeah, just on the 17% stock bank liability that I suppose you could call it. In the infrastructure strategy, do we talk about secondary liabilities that potentially exist for the council? Because I know that there is calls at the moment on where we've got known vulnerabilities. If something happens, then people want compensation. Does that get transferred through the infrastructure strategy as a cost liability on the council? So you can balance the decisions about where you do the investment versus how much your actual liability could be. I think that's what I'm trying to ask. I'm really worried about just the exposure to liability that could potentially be there.
Not directly, but indirectly, yes. So there's no chapter in there talking about the contingent liability of failure, and there's no provisional reserve for that happening. But indirectly, what that 17% represents is the physical condition of the stop bank when it was assessed. What it doesn't represent is the consequence side of that risk, and it's entirely possible that you could have a really poor condition stop bank in a really low consequence zone, and for it to be okay. It's entirely separate situation to have a really poor condition stop bank protecting Christchurch or Rangiora or Kaiapoi, etc.
And is that in the infrastructure strategy itself, or is that something else that happens alongside somewhere else? Because that is a really important distinction between where we need to be thinking of what levels we want invested in and where we want the investment to be prioritised.
Yeah, not currently in the strategy itself. It's in these. We have been doing annual condition assessment reports, and then that's the key findings are referenced in the infrastructure strategy. It's something, if you're looking for a bit more detail, we could look at dragging a bit more into the infrastructure strategy to guide some of those decisions.
I'll just add that it will definitely influence the operating maintenance budgets, and particularly where there are substantial gaps. There is a table, and there will be a table in the strategy of larger OPEX and CAPEX investments, so that's visible, and a lot of those will be addressing those, or where there is risk and consequence.
Thank you. We've got two very final, very quick questions, one from Councillor Gerard and one from Councillor Robinson. Thank you.
Just vulnerabilities. You need rabbits on here?
Councillor Robinson.
No, mine's more sort of a confirmation of what Chair Swiggs has said. I think the secondary liability issue is something that's in my mind, because catastrophic failure of some of our infrastructure would be devastating. But then I'm also looking at fire risk from our plantation land, or normally sort of like flood protection areas. If there was an issue, say with fire in the future or something like that, what sort of things have we got in place to, I guess, remedy if that was to happen? I don't know, like.
I might not be able to answer that fully, but my understanding is there's no insurance on our forestry assets, so that would probably be a book loss on the organisation. So that would have a consequence down the track, because we use revenue from those forests to fund our infrastructure in the catchment. That is identified as a risk in my initial drafting, fire, particularly with climate change increasing the risk potentially. So it has a double impact. One is that often those forests are in locations where they stop the flow and soak up the water when the rains come. So that would be less than optimal if the forests were gone, and then you also lose the obviously the value in the timber completely.
I guess further to that, and more broadly on the liability on the flood protection side. Next time we come to you, we're going to have a few options, as Nick was referring to, of things we may or may not be able to trade off against each other. Improving the asset management suite of tools. It's not just one bit of kit, but asset management in general is one of those things that we'll put on the table to lift. The current legislation says that effectively there's no liability unless negligence is involved. Our best way that we can ensure that there's no negligence involved is by having good asset management. So what we'll put in front of you is tools that we can have to uplift our asset management toolbox.
Thank you very much, and thank you to staff for continuing to work with us as we navigate the long-term plan process. And it's complex, and there's competing wants and needs within a constrained funding vehicle. It's been a very worthwhile afternoon that I have enjoyed very much, and I'm sure my colleagues have as well. Thank you very much and have a great evening. We will conclude with karakia from Councillor Mackay.
That little bit at the end gave me time to actually find it. Kia hora, te marano, ki whakapapara, pounamu, te moana. Hei huare, ma tātou iti ringanei. Araha ata, araha mai, tātou i tātou katoa. Huye taikio. Thank you.